for some meadow overalls. So here's the case of Chandler Halderson. Chandler was 23 and he'd hurt himself pretty badly. They put some sofas together. They usually game late into the early hours, cleaning products from cleaning up the blood. The glass was missing in the fireplace. And also, she let them know a weird thing was happening, that vultures were circling around the area where he'd been. And as they were searching through it, they came across a human torso. And inside there, they found what they could only describe as cutting tools. So they found scissors, a saw, bolt cutters, kept in a cooler in the basement, so in the room next to the family room the night cat stayed. Good morning everyone, how are you? How are we? Welcome to the channel. So True Crime. I am beyond excited. I'm Victoria and I'm glad to have you here. So I love sewing, all things sewing. I like making clothes, I like making bows, scrunchies, anything. I love making. And often when I sew, I'll pop on a true crime podcast, listen to that while I'm finishing a project and letting my cup of tea go cold. Now, I figured, being ADHD, why not give that a go myself? Let's sew and tell a true crime story, pop it all together and see if we can make any sense of it. So I figured we'd give that a go. So I figured that's what we'd do today. I'm going to make some overalls. I have many moons ago downloaded a pattern from Lydia Naomi for some meadow overalls, and I made myself these and I live in them and I love them. The problem is they have pockets on the outside as well as on the inside, and they make me look like a pear. So I'm going to make a new pair today. Pear. A lot of sew, and a lot of pear. So I'm going to make myself a new set today without the external pockets, and while we do that we're going to have a little natter. So this case takes us across the pond to a little suburb just outside of Madison, Wisconsin called DeForest. Now I may get some pronunciations wrong, so please feel free to drop them, correct versions, correct way of saying things down in the comments, that's fine. And with a population of around 11,000 people, everyone knows each other. It's a really neighbourly area, really friendly, and everyone's quick to help each other out. It's one of those really quiet, calm, peaceful, safe villages with a lot of hiking trails. You open your back door and you just you can tell you're not in a city. It has a really low crime rate. It's an amazing place to raise a family. So that's why the community was completely shocked on the 7th of July 2021 when local mum and dad, Krista, 53, and Bart, 50, went missing. So here's the case of Chandler Halderson. In the early 90s, Krista was in her early 20s and was a manager at a department store called Boston in Madison. And then while working there, Bart also joined the team as a clerk. They were often on shift together and they would often have little natters, and they realised that they had a lot in common. A lot of things like doing up the house, so to speak. Krista majored in art history, so had a flair for interior design, while Bart had a knack for DIY, fixing up the house. And over time they got closer and closer, and their working relationship grew into a romantic one. So both of them, not wanting to raise a family in busy Madison, they decided when they got married in 1994 that they would leave the department store and move to a quiet suburb in DeForest. Then in 1996 they welcomed their first child, Mitchell, and Krista was delighted that she would be able to, stay at home. do the mum thing, and Bart having a new job as an accountant, she was able to do this. And then 1.5 years later, they then welcomed their second son, Chandler, and Krista was still able to stay at home to help them both strive and nourish them. She was just like that. She liked to give plenty of nourishment, plenty of love. And with Bart moving up the ladder, there was financially less stress, so she was able to do it. It was said though that even after 25 years of marriage, Bart and Krista still absolutely adored each other and would opt to spend their time together with each other, that they still, even after 25 years, had so much love for each other. Once the boys were old enough, Krista went back to work, and she worked at an automotive car place where she developed lasting friendships and was well respected. Mitchell at 25 had graduated from college, and he'd had an amazing IT job. He was engaged and he was about to buy his first home. Chandler was 23. He was still living at home, but he was still doing equally as well. He was almost done with his last year of college. He had a well-paying part-time job for an insurance company where he could work from home in his room, and he'd just accepted a job with SpaceX in Florida, meaning he was going to be moving there. So Chandler also had a long-term girlfriend who was also going to be moving to Florida with him. So before the big move, he made sure he had an apartment rented out ready and a car that he could just pick up on the other side. So they were all sorted. However, just a few weeks before the move, Chandler had taken a fall down the stairs and he'd hurt himself pretty badly. Once he come round, he was feeling a bit of numbness, so he got himself off to the hospital to get himself checked out. And this is where he learned he had a severe concussion. He had a big bleed on the brain, which he was told may require some surgery, and that he had spinal and nerve damage, which resulted in him having to wear a neck brace for a few weeks. But the hardest part for Chandler was learning that due to him possibly needing surgery and the nerve and spinal damage, he wasn't even able to travel to Florida, and his dream job with SpaceX just slipped away. As you can imagine, living in constant pain as well as physical limitations due to his injuries, he'd just become really depressed. I'll just get these overlocked and I'll be right with you. So I'm back with cup of tea number 2. Let's crack on, shall we? So a few weeks after the incident on the 7th of July, Chandler woke up and something just didn't feel right. His mum and dad had been on a trip and they should have been home by now. But they hadn't even texted, nor called, nothing. He hadn't heard from them. So Chandler went off to the Danes County Sheriff's Department. So when he went in there, he briefly explained that his mum and dad should have returned home by now. They'd gone off for the weekend for some 4th of July celebrations and they still hadn't returned home, and he hadn't heard from them. So after the initial information, detectives sent out the missing person reports and began their investigations. What is going on here? So later on that evening, detectives went round to Chris and Bart's house. They went over to the Halderson house. They wanted to have a chat and get a bit more information. They needed a bit of a starting place. They needed to know the story. They needed to know what was going on. So off they popped. went and had a little chat with Chandler. Chandler then explains that on Thursday the 1st of July, his mum and dad had said that they were going to go up to the cabin for the 4th of July celebration weekend. They were going to clean it. They were going to go with 2 friends who were going to pick them up early hours in the morning so they didn't have to drive. So let's go back to a few days prior to Chandler making the report so we can better understand what's going on. On Friday the 2nd of July, 2 of Krista's work colleagues arrive at Krista's home. And as they continue walking up, they're met with Chandler at the door, at the side garage door. And he's clearly just got out of the shower. He's all wet. The colleagues ask where Krista is. It's not like her. She's not tipped up for work. Where is she? What's she doing? Is she all right? And Chandler briefly explains that, yeah, they're fine. They just figured they'd get an early start on the celebrations and travel up to the cabin early for the 4th of July celebrations that weekend. The colleagues, Krista's colleagues, they thought it was odd. It's really unlike her. She doesn't call in sick. She doesn't have days off. She plans them. She books holiday. They thought it was odd. Looking a little confused, they glance over at the garage, and that's when Chandler lets them know that, oh, their cars are there because they got picked up. One of their friends, like their other friends, come and pick them up so they didn't have to drive all the way out there. And as they go to turn around, they notice Chandler's got this like bandage. It's really noticeable because it's really big and sticking out of his foot, and he clocks it and he says, oh yeah, I was just playing with the family dog. I was playing with Rizzo. The dog's called, they've got 2 family dogs. I was playing with Rizzo. I threw the ball. She kept running to grab the ball, bringing it back, and I threw it into the fireplace. It smashed everywhere and blood was everywhere, and oh yeah, I got it in my toe. So yeah, that's what that is. No worries. So laughing it off as if it was nothing, Krista's work colleagues then leave. They go off. They've done their little check. They're off to go and start their 4th of July celebrations too. So the morning of the 4th of July, Chandler receives a loving message from his mum letting him know that happy 4th of July. Me and Dad, we're going to stay on a few extra days so we can catch hold of the parade. We'll be back home late Monday night or early Tuesday morning. So Chandler, rather than spending the day on his own, he heads over to his girlfriend's house. Well, his girlfriend's mum's house. His girlfriend's mum lives on a farm over at a place called Cottage Grove. It's about 20-30 minutes away. So he heads over there in the car. He spends the day having food with them, relaxing in their pool. And then him and his girlfriend Kat then head over to her apartment to collect some clothes that she needs before they both head back to Chandler's house, because she's staying over at Chandler's house that night. Now, usually when they stay over at Chandler's, so usually when Kat goes over and stays over at Chandler's house, they usually sleep downstairs. There's more space. They have this like family room. They put some sofas together. They usually game late into the early hours, and they can watch movies, and it's less disruptive for the family, so they usually stay there. But Kat noticed that night that the dogs wouldn't settle, and there was just like this weird smell, and she just couldn't get off to sleep. So they both went upstairs to Chandler's bedroom to go to sleep because she had work in the morning. She couldn't be doing this. She needed to get up for work early hours in the morning, and she needed a good night's sleep. So they went upstairs and they went to sleep. So Kat wakes up the next day and heads off to work early in the morning, and she leaves Chandler tucked up in bed, only to receive a message from him a bit later on to say he's took himself off to the hospital. He's in a lot of pain, and with his accident that was quite a plausible thing for him. So she kept checking on him throughout the day, only she couldn't get hold of him at one point, and at 4:30 p.m. that day he was spotted back on the farm at Cottage Grove by Kat's mum, and she's really confused and she's really puzzled as to why he's there. And he just says, oh, can I use your pool? It really helps with my pain. So she leaves him to it and she lets him use the pool. Only a short while later, she's looking out the window, she realises the pool cover isn't off and Chandler's nowhere to be seen. So she pops her head out the door, has a little look round, and spots his car over at the far side of the wood line. They've got an old crusty barn there, but his car's there and it's really tucked away, but he's got his trunk open. We call it a boot here in the UK, so he's got his boot open, and he just seems really vacant, and it's just a really odd place to be, so leaves him to it. Kat's mum and her partner get in the pool, and after a while Chandler comes to the pool, and he's acting a bit vacant, and Kat's mum says to him, "What was you doing over there? Like, we don't use that bit." And he just says he was having a bit of a breakdown and he didn't want no one to see him crying. And with that, he jumps in the pool. They find it a bit odd as well, because it's like he socially was really unaware of what his surroundings were, because Kat's mum partner was in the pool without a costume on, and he just jumped in the pool, and they sort of spot him. He doesn't do anything, he's just sort of like splashing water over himself as if he's washing himself down, as if he's washing dirt off him, or like an invisible shield or something. They just thought it was a bit odd. I'll just sew these straps and I'll get back to you. So a few days later, on that Wednesday, so Wednesday the 7th of July, Chandler wakes up and he knows something isn't right. His mum and dad ain't there. The house is empty. Checks his phone, no message from his mum, no message from his dad, no calls, nothing. And this is what makes him go off to the Danes County Sheriff's Department to file a missing persons report. So later that evening on the 7th, detectives go round to the house, so to the Halderson's home. They go and have a little chat with Chandler. They need to get some more information. They need to know what's going on. Chandler then tells them that they were heading out to the cabin for the 4th of July celebrations, and they left on Thursday the 1st. He didn't actually physically see them leave because they'd left really super early that morning with friends, so he physically hadn't seen them leave. He then told detectives that his mum had messaged on the morning of the 4th of July, and that to say that she loved him and they were going to be staying on a few extra days to go to the parade, watch the parade. They'd be home later Monday evening or early hours Tuesday morning. While Chandler was talking, detectives was taking notes and they were having a little look around, and then they asked if they could have a little walk around, and Chandler was walking them through the house. And detectives noticed that there was glass missing from the fireplace in the family room, and Chandler then offered up the reason for why the glass was missing in the fireplace. He mentioned he was playing with Rizzo, the family dog. He was throwing the ball and it had smashed into it. Luckily it didn't get Rizzo, but it had cut his foot to pieces and there was just blood everywhere. So he explained to detectives that's why there was no glass in the fireplace. And as they got further through the house, detectives could smell like a really strong chemical smell, and detectives asked, they were like, "What is that smell?" And Chandler explained it was cleaning products from cleaning up the blood because of the cut, and he didn't want his mum and dad to freak out, so he explained that's what that smell was. And then he then showed the detectives his toe, and showed them that he'd had a big cut on it from standing in said glass, and that he had to clean through the house, and that's what that smell was. He hadn't really noticed the cut, and then there was blood everywhere, and then he noticed the cut, so then he had to go through the house and clean the house. And then with that information, detectives went off and they started looking into things a bit more and looking into the case a little bit more. So the next day, with the missing persons alert out, Kat's mum calls detectives. She felt it was important to let them know what happened a few days prior with Chandler. And also, she let them know a weird thing was happening, that vultures were circling around the area where he'd been and even though she was in a wooded, secluded area, it's not something that happened. That it just wasn't a thing that happened. So alarm bells were going off in detectives' heads at this point. So they asked permission if they could search Kat's mum's land and search the farm. And she was like, yeah, of course, come on over. So they went over and they started doing a search of the area where Kat's mum had said the vultures were. Now, during that search, they found a man-made mound. So like a load of brambles and branches and bristles, sticks and stuff, all mounded up high, and they just thought it was odd. So they thought, let's have a little look. And they lifted it up and started searching through, and as they were searching through it, they came across a human torso. The human torso had gunshot wounds to the back, so it prompted a wider search of the area. During that wider search, they found an old rusty oil tank, and inside there they found what they could only describe as cutting tools. So they found scissors, a saw, bolt cutters, and all of them had this fatty, blood, oily residue on them. So the search continued and they went into the barn. Remember the barn I told you where Chandler's car was tucked right up in and he had his boot trunk open? So they searched that barn and they were looking, and right in the back of that barn, right in the corner, far corner, was, yeah, you guessed it, a rifle. They found a rifle right in the back dark corner. So with that, the police put everything together and got a search warrant for the Haldersons' house. Now, while this was all going on, Chandler was still completely oblivious to this all happening. He was busy running around the neighbourhood and knocking on neighbours' doors, asking if their security footage could capture his house and the road, just outside his house. He was just wanting to see if anybody security cameras could cover the footage of that. So while the detectives were up at the farm, Cottage Grove, they were collecting statements, talking to people, and still doing the searches and putting things into evidence. Chandler's big brother, Mitchell, remember Mitchell? Yeah. Chandler's big brother Mitchell had took the keys for the cabin and then with his fiancée had travelled 3 hours up the road up north to White Lake, where their cabin was, to search for his parents. When they arrived, they waited outside for the Longleat County Sheriff's Department to meet with them. The Dane County Sheriff's Department had already contacted them and asked them to help them with the search. Only when Mitchell and the sheriffs had gone into the cabin, you've guessed it, only when they have gone into the cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in ages. Nobody had been there in ages. It was dusty, it was dark. The sheriff's department spoke to the neighbours and none of them had seen anybody coming or going in months. So it was clear and it was obvious that Krista and Bart weren't there. So I did it wrong. So I'm just going to unpick. Just did it. Instead of right sides together, I did it one right side together, one wrong side together. So I'm just going to unpick it. While we're unpicking it, we'll carry on. So to no one's surprise, with all the mounting evidence against him, the detectives decide to bring him in. They bring him in for an interview. So they bring him in and they sit with him for about 2 hours just to see if his story will change. And his story doesn't change. And annoyed, 2 hours later, detectives just come right out and say it. They say, look, we know your parents are no longer with us. We know they're no longer living and we have evidence, so this is why we know, and we have the evidence to prove it. And it's at this point that Chandler gets his back up and he asks for a lawyer. And once you ask for a lawyer, that's it. The detectives can no longer talk to you, they can no longer question you. So they're sitting there not questioning Chandler, and all he keeps doing is repeating over and over, you don't know the whole story. You don't know what they did to me. and I don't feel bad for what I did. I don't feel bad for what I did. And at this time, they then arrest him for providing false information regarding his parents' disappearance. They can't arrest him for anything else at this point because they don't know at this point who the torso belongs to. They have a good idea, but they don't have actual evidence that that torso belongs to a certain person. So for the time being, they arrest him for providing false information in his parents' disappearance. So with Chandler in jail, detectives knew they needed to make sure they could gain as much evidence as they possibly could because, well, Chandler wasn't going to tell them the truth. They needed timelines, they needed facts. And while they were in with Chandler and he was in jail, they found out that the torso sadly belonged to Bart Halderson, Chandler's dad. They were able to confirm that Bart was shot at point blank range. He was shot in the back and the bullet had hit his spinal cord before fragmenting. The medical examiner was able to say that the injury would have been fatal. So detectives then head over to the Halderson home and they do a forensic search of the Halderson home. And they find shell casings consistent with that of the rifle they found in the shed, the barn. They search the fireplace where the missing glass was, and they find over 200 human bone fragments. 200 human bone fragments. The strong chemical smell that they could smell, detectives followed it all the way down to the basement to a workbench. There was evidence of blood and there was a strong smell of a chemical cleanup. So detectives then got luminol testing involved, and under luminol they could see that the house, they could see that it had been cleaned up. Traces of blood was everywhere, even if it was faint because it had been cleaned, and they could still see it. But they also could see by the door of the basement and the garage blood all over Chandler's trainers. Now, while this was happening, because Chandler had been going around asking neighbours for security footage and if their cameras could see his house or the road from his house, most neighbours thought that this was normal because he was just a kid looking for his mum. Say kid. And he was just somebody looking for his parents. However, one neighbour thought that this was so odd. He thought the conversation was so odd because that neighbour, only a few nights before, his camera had captured the Halderson's home in the middle of the night, and it stood out to him because there was a blazing fire in the fireplace, going off in the fireplace in the family room of the Halderson's home, and he thought it was odd because it was the middle of summer, nobody had their fires on, and he just thought it was peculiar, and he kept remembering the smell, and the smell was what he's described as a very strong smell of pork. And with the footage, with Chandler being at the door, it all just felt very odd. So he had a little look through his security footage, and on the July 1st, early hours of the 2nd, he could see this fire, roaring fire, and it was going most of the evening, and then around 3 o'clock it really peaked, and it peaked so much that you could see it from the next window, the next room, and all the curtains were shut, and the next window, so all the curtains were shut, but this fire was so great you could see it. And he said it really about 3 o'clock come to a real big flickering light, like really big blaze light, and then it just stopped. It just finished, like there was no fire, it was all pitch black. So with that, the neighbours handed that footage and their statement over to detectives as well, so they also had that to help them. So with detectives still trying to get all the information they needed and still trying to get all the evidence, they stopped off to speak to a woman who had seen somebody matching Chandler's description on July 3rd, and she thought it was odd because Chandler was walking next to a really busy road. So his car was parked up near Wisconsin's River in Roxbury, and she thought it was odd because he kept pacing back and forth from the car up a busy road, then back and forth. So detectives went and had a little chat with her, and they asked how she knew it was his car, and she said because she kept seeing him going back and forth to the car. And she took some screenshots, no, she took some photos, because she did at that time think it was just so peculiar. So she took some photos, and the detectives asked if they could have them, so she handed them over. And after they'd got that information, they then went and spoke to Kat. Remember Kat, Chandler's girlfriend? Yeah. So they went and spoke to her, and Kat was saying how she wanted to stay over the night of the 3rd so they could wake up together on the 4th of July together. Only Chandler was being really odd and saying he couldn't do that, he had chores to do, which really threw her off because he'd never really bothered about stuff like that. And Chandler had a past of cheating, so she used to keep tabs on him through Snapchat. It's an app that you can talk to your friends and family, but she used to keep tabs on him through that on a map to see where he was. And she was saying that it was really odd, so she checked his location on Snapchat, and around 10:30, 11 p.m. that evening of the 3rd, his location was at the Wisconsin River in Roxbury, the same place that lady had seen him, but at different times. So she took a screenshot because she was like, right, I've got you. And she took a screenshot because she wanted to discuss it with him the next day. So the next day would have been the 4th, only she didn't do that. She hadn't managed to do that yet. And thankfully she had that screenshot of his location, so detectives were then able to have that as a piece of evidence. But with that, because 2 people had then now reportedly seen Chandler at that river, the Wisconsin River at Roxbury, detectives decided to do a search there. So with the evidence, with the screenshots of Chandler being at the river in Roxbury, detectives order a search of the area, and sadly they find a dismembered leg, and beside it what appeared to be a thigh, or a partial bit of thigh, and a left foot. Now, detectives couldn't say who it was, but they had a pretty good hunch who it was. This then prompted them to do a wider search of the area, and they find a tree, which is later to be known one of Chandler's favourite swimming spots. Next to the tree, they find more remains of Krista Halderson, and with that, Chandler is then formally charged with the murder of his dad Bart and the murder of his mum Krista. So, I'm guessing you're like me. We all just want to know, why Chandler? Why did you do it? What was the reasoning behind it all? Well, let's break it down. Chandler had been living a double life. All of it was faked. He dropped out of college on the first semester. The job he was working remotely for in insurance was non-existent. And well, SpaceX, I'm sure you've guessed it. Yep, that was fake too. So, let's break it down a little bit more. Bart couldn't understand why Chandler was always skint. He was always so broke. He couldn't pay rent, he never had any money, so he couldn't understand it. He had such a good job, so he couldn't understand why. Chandler just kept telling his dad it was a payroll issue. Oh, it's fine, Dad, it will get sorted, it's just payroll. They're just having a muddled up, it's just all muddled up. And then, to counteract this lie, Chandler then made up the job at SpaceX. So he told everyone, so to get his dad off his back, he told everyone, I've got a job at SpaceX and I'm going to be leaving soon, so I'm going to be moving all the way out to Florida. And with that, Bart wasn't worried then. He stopped asking questions about rent, all of it. You know, Chandler's a big boy, he's going off. So Chandler, that was it. Chandler was leaving, he was going off to SpaceX to live his life, only SpaceX was a lie. So how did he counteract that? He fell down the stairs. He fell down the stairs and lost his dream job. And that put an end to the SpaceX lie. Things were starting to catch up with Chandler. With graduation happening, Krista wanted to see Chandler's certificates, his graduation certificates, she was a proud mum. She wanted to know and see them. There was no ceremony, it was COVID time, so there was no ceremony, but she wanted to see the certificates. But she also knew that it was, holding him back, not being able to have his certificates. He'd just lost his SpaceX job. He wanted, better for himself, and she wanted better for him. So with the certificates, he could then update his CV and just reach for a bit further, a bit higher, a bit closer to home. So she kept asking Bart and Chandler to get in touch with the school. Get in touch, find out what's going on. College, university, find out what's going on. However, this wouldn't work because Chandler obviously knew he hadn't been in college. He hadn't done the semesters. He hadn't done any of it. So there was no graduation, there was no certificates, there was nothing. So to counteract this, Chandler made up loads of fake email addresses, and he was communicating with his dad and himself through the college, university, from these fake email addresses. And he was communicating back and forth, and he was telling Bart that they would get sorted out soon. It was an admin error, it would get sorted out soon. But after a lot of back and forth, Bart was getting understandably quite frustrated, and he was in a sense being fobbed off, and he was getting annoyed. It was holding Chandler back. He couldn't get any further forward because he didn't have his certificates. He didn't have things to prove that he'd graduated. So annoyed, he phoned them up himself on the 29th of June and spoke to the people in the administration office, and he quickly became really aware that something wasn't right. Things weren't adding up. He slowly pieced together that Chandler was no longer at college. He'd not been at college for a long time. But then he also figured out the people that he'd been corresponding with the past few weeks were non-existent. None of them belonged in the office. No one was named from the correspondence was in the admin office. And just to make it even worse, Bart then found out he owed the college thousands. He owed thousands of dollars because Chandler, in order to save his skin and make it look like he was still at college, kept signing up for loads of courses and not doing them. And as we all know, college courses are quite expensive. So with hearing all this information, Bart arranged an in-house meeting for the 1st of July, and Chandler was very aware of the meeting because he would have to be part of the meeting. So Bart let him know, 1st of July, me and you, son, we're going to go down there and we're going to go sort this out and figure out what's going on. So it's believed that the 1st of July come around, and in the afternoon Bart messaged up to Chandler saying, ready when you are. And it's believed that Chandler then come downstairs with his dad's back to him and shot him in the back at point blank range, killing him, and then dragged his body down to the basement. He then waited for his mum to come home. After she finished work, she walks in and he then kills her. It's unknown how he killed her because all that was able to be found of her was her leg, partial thigh, and her foot. So it's unsure how she died. They theorised that with the evidence of the neighbour's camera and his statement, that Chandler spent the evening of the 1st and the early hours of the 2nd of July dismembering his mum and dad and then putting them in the fire to try and incinerate them. And it's believed that the neighbour's camera picked up the massive flame that looked like it was going to engulf the house. It's believed that that happened because due to fat render, the fire got so hot that the glass then smashed, and the reason that it all then stopped, the fire then went out, was because you could no longer have a fire in the house without the whole house going on fire. It's believed then he was then forced to spread the remaining body parts around the place. So his mum at the Wisconsin River in Roxbury and his dad at Cottage Grove Farm. So in court they theorised that Chandler took his mum to the river in the morning, parts of his mum to the river in the morning, and that's when the lady had caught him and thought he was odd, or thought the situation was odd. She wasn't wrong. And then Kat later that evening had actually caught him, so it's theorised that he went back there to spread the remainder of his mum's remains, and that's when Kat took the screenshot and caught him there. It's believed that Bart was kept in a cooler in the basement, so in the room next to the family room, the night Kat stayed. So the smell she was smelling and the reason the dogs were going crazy was because of that, and it's because Bart was lying mere feet away from her. And it's theorised that the next day when Kat's gone to work, that Chandler then went up to Cottage Grove Farm and disposed of his dad's torso underneath the brambles and the rest of the instruments used to dismember the bodies, as well as trying to hide the rifle in the barn. So after deliberations, he was found guilty of 2 counts of intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, and providing false information about missing persons. And he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. So that's the case of Chandler Halderson. Let's show you the finished product. So I really loved my other ones of these. The only thing I didn't like after wearing it was the big pocket on the outside, and I've took that off, so I can see these becoming some of my fast favourites too. Let me know how we did in the comments. Next week we have a real good case coming up, so all that's left to do is bid you farewell. Take care of yourself, take care of others. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you again real soon.